Okay, my name is Trevor Prime, I'm a consultant podiatric surgeon, and the aim of this video is to cover some of the principles for taking a cast. Obviously, when we want to make a precision orthosis, a custom orthosis such as PodFlow, we need to get an accurate impression of the foot, and one of the secrets is to try and make that as repeatable, as reliable as possible. So we're going to just talk through some of those concepts. There are a couple of ways that you can take the cast. Obviously, with the patient supine like this, there is something called the suspension technique that uses the weight of the foot and the leg to help lock the foot into position. But that can actually be quite strenuous for somebody to undertake. So we sort of get lazy and cheat a bit. So in this position, we're able to take almost like a reverse suspension technique, and we're going to use the fourth and fifth toes where I can distract and plantar flex and then go to resistance. If I try and go too far, the toes will start to dorsiflex, so it's quite a nice controlling position to lock out the mid-tarsal joint. It's quite common for people to use the thumb on the fourth and fifth met heads to do the same, but I quite often see people putting too much pressure on there, and obviously you get an indentation on the plaster cast, which can sometimes skew the quality of the cast. In order to try and standardise the position, we're moving away from Root Weedon and Ryan's subtalar neutral position. You can feel for the head of the talus to try and get that consistent. What we tend to do is to flex the opposite knee and leg, rotate the leg until the malleoli axis is parallel with the floor, where we can lock the foot into a fairly repeatable position. Other considerations when we're preparing is whether or not we want to make any skin markings so they come out on the cast for the benefit of the lab, and that might be for something such as where the key pain is for plantar heel pain, if someone's got a particularly tight fascia, so we want to mark the fascia for a fascial groove, if they have pain beneath the ball of the foot and we want to have a redistributive pad so we locate where the pain was. And in some of the orthoses like PodFlow, they have a progressive flex, which is where the flexibility of the device changes between the thickness of it, so you can have rigid in one point, flexible in another point, so it gives you a bit more variation of how the orthoses works. One final consideration is whether or not we want to correct the foot position at all. So if we have somebody whose forefoot's inverted, for instance, which may be flexible, what we can do when we take the cast is to use hallux dorsiflexion and pressure onto the midfoot to correct out any inversion, so that now the arch of the cast and therefore the orthoses automatically captures the position that relates to the mobility of the foot. And we're going to do that in this particular instance. In some instances, if you have someone with a very rigid flat foot, you may even consider taking a pronated cast, but that's much less common. The next stage is preparing the plaster of Paris material, and different people have different techniques. I'm going to show you the technique I've used for a number of years. I tend to use 3 layers of plaster of Paris, and my markings for length go from the distal aspect of the hallux to the fifth metatarsal, and so it goes all the way around the foot in one go. One of the problems that you can get when you take a cast like this is as you fold the material, it creases, which can affect the quality of the inside of the cast. So a little technique that we do is to cut the plaster of Paris material at this point, and you can either do that before you cast, or you can do it after you've put the wet plaster of Paris on. If you do it before, when you're trying to remove all of the excess water, that can be a bit trickier. So we'll show you how to do it once the plaster of Paris is on the foot. The other aspect to consider is where the plaster of Paris crosses over underneath the foot. And what I tend to do with that is to have one thickness all the way over the sole of the foot and then fold across. And I'll show you how we do that. That way we don't get a line of the junction with the plaster of Paris in the middle of the cast. So let's get ready to do this cast. It's always the nice messy bit. And I tend to use my fingers to keep a couple of layers of the plaster. So we're going to get that nice and wet in there. What I'm now going to do is to place that over the foot using my original dimensions. I'm then going to take my scissors and cut straight up to the heel. I can fold that away, and now you'll see I can bring this bit of plaster of Paris all the way around so it makes one contact with the foot. I can then bring my lateral piece back round to cross over. It's quite nice if you can capture the lateral malleolus. Some of the labs like to use that as part of their balancing technique. What I tend to do then is to just fold down slightly so that it gives a little bit of resistance and support to the plaster of Paris. So I'm now going to smooth that over. You can see I've got plenty of time to work with this. I'm going to get my 4th and 5th toes, and I'm now going to just plantar flex that medial aspect to the forefoot. And you can actually take your hand off. You've got some working time to make that nice and smooth, and then go back to it. And now it's a case of being patient and waiting for the plaster of Paris to set. Okay, so now we've got the cast set nicely. It's nice and firm. What I'm going to do is just give Neely's foot a little shake, and then I can just gently tease plaster cast off. And that's sitting nice and flat on the work surface, so I've corrected the forefoot position nicely, and we're ready to go. Sending these casts away before they're fully dry can be a problem because they'll crush in the box. So what you want to do is either leave them overnight to dry, maybe on a radiator, or stick them in a microwave for 20 seconds. That hardens them up quite nicely. But obviously don't cook your dinner in there afterwards.